Israel is still at war. Yes, I know we have a whole bunch of different ceasefire agreements in place, but the wars are not nearly close to being over despite the public opinion. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And today we're going to unpack all 8 fronts, where we stand as of now and what will be. If you heard the news that Israel took out number 2 of Hamas in Gaza, that Saudi Arabia has built a secret pipeline all the way to Israel, that Turkey and Qatar are trying to delay the Phase 2 agreement, and an escalation of war with Hezbollah in Lebanon is imminent, that the US just confiscated a shipment from China to Iran of arms, and that a deal is underway with Syria, and you want to know more, this episode is for you. This is the Meira K Show on JNS TV. Let's dive right in. So it's been 2 years since the war with Gaza began, and as we are now in our third ceasefire stage, it might feel like it's kind of ended. But to understand where we really stand, we need to know that the conflict started way before October 7th of 2023. Some would say it's about 50 years old. I mean, those who read the Muslim Brotherhood's manifestos or watch this show, and some would say it started in 1947 when we got the state. Some would even say it's thousands of years old because of the root of all of these seemingly military conflicts is actually a religious war. I mean, if you were to look at the 8 fronts that we are up against — Gaza, Lebanon, Judea and Samaria, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Yemen, and the Muslim Brotherhood, i.e. Qatar, and by the way, potentially another 2 with rising tensions with Turkey and Egypt, it doesn't take a genius to notice that they all belong to a specific religion, one that historically doesn't have a tremendous love for us Jews. Now, why am I bringing this up? Well, because in our history, we are used to wars having an end date, a liberation day, a clear red line that marks the final move into victory. And that is often the case with regular military wars. An agreement is paid, the war ends, and the healing begins. Alas, with religious wars, it's a little bit different. For religion, the idea of a timeline is not really relevant. There is endless patience to arrive at your God-ordained goal. The fight never really dies. When fighting jihadists and militias that have a very clear-cut religious goal of destruction of the Jewish state, the truth is we are always in some state of perpetual war. This is one of the biggest mistakes we made on October 6th, believing that we were in a time of peace. Yes, there were rockets flying from Gaza and from Hezbollah, terror attacks throughout the country, extensive intelligence of Iran building up its arsenal of nukes, and clear proof of the Islamic takeover of Europe. But we had gotten used to it, and so we were at peace. The idea that the war ends is a false premise. It's the wrong question to ask. And this, to me, is where Trump is honestly making a major mistake in his doctrine. You know, the national security strategy that they just released in November. In it, he claims that the peace in the Middle East has basically been obtained, that he ended the Gaza-Israel war as well as the Israel-Iran escalation. The document is extensive, and I'm not going to get into all of the details, and there is definitely no disregarding the fact that Trump has been an amazing friend to Israel, and he has done an extraordinary amount in a very short time. But it is still flawed. He thinks that by creating of a master plan and getting countries to sign onto it, peace has been obtained. But for us, unfortunately, the war never truly ends. Not because we want the war, but because they won't stop coming at us. Which brings me to the current situation in Gaza. By now, you have probably heard that over the weekend, Israel took out the number 2 in Hamas. Ra'ad Saad was a senior architect of Hamas's military operations and weapons productions, and October 7th. Taking him out seriously weakens their military power. It was a targeted assassination on his vehicle with 3 other terrorists, and it was done during what is supposed to be the ceasefire, i.e., no fighting between the enemies. However, to terrorists, the term ceasefire has a little bit of a different meaning to what we might understand. You see, quickly, Hamas are regrouping. And on a technical note, Hamas has actually been breaking the ceasefire agreement every day, that not all of the hostages have been returned. And we still know that unfortunately there is one left. We are thinking of him and praying that he comes back soon. Which means that we're actually not in a ceasefire agreement with them really, because they're not keeping to any of the terms. But regardless, our definition of a ceasefire has somewhat changed. We might not actively be in constant combat, despite the fact that Hamas is still targeting our soldiers and injuring them. The number of injured soldiers has jumped significantly in the last few weeks. But as of now, we are still taking out any terrorist who tries to cross the yellow line. We are still actively looking for our hostages, collecting pieces of evidence, like the video of the 6 hostages lighting the candles last Hanukkah. What an intense video. And taking out specific dangerous terrorists. Aid is overflowing into Gaza, unfortunately, and we have so many crazy reports from them lately, like them hiding the baby formula sent to the children so they could have more dead children. So much so that even Amnesty International, that very lefty anti Israel human rights organization, has finally condemned them for war crimes against humanity. Yes, it's 2 years too late, to be honest, but even they can't ignore it anymore. But this new state of perpetual conflict isn't what is going to be the new norm. You see, we're waiting to hear about the second stage of the conflict, the one that really counts. Remember, the ceasefire agreement was as such. The first stage was all hostages were returned within 72 hours, prisoners in Israel would to be released, Hamas agrees to disarm, and then we can go into the second stage, which involves a 20-step plan of rebuilding Gaza. There is just one fundamental flaw in all of this, which is the small fact that Hamas is never, ever going to disarm. And you don't need to take my word for that. This is what they have been saying publicly. So what now? Well, we have a few issues at hand. The first being that Trump is uninterested in the ceasefire deal ending with a restart of the war from Israel's side. He wants that peace that he promised, and so he is putting huge amounts of pressure not to restart combat. Because that is exactly what Israel should be doing, going in there with full military pressure and working to dismantle Hamas completely. That was our war goal, and that is what needs to happen for Israel to stay safe. And that brings us to the next big issue, which is that Hamas is not really the only problem with Gaza. It's actually the fact that basically the entire society, yes, maybe there are a few exceptions to this rule, but basically all of them have been radicalized. We know that one of our military strategies has been to arm internal militias to fight against Hamas, but they can turn on us any day. They are no friend of Israel. And so the whole idea of finishing Hamas doesn't really work properly, which is something that Qatar and Turkey are very much trying to capitalize on. Qatar, Turkey, what have they got to do with this? Well, they are putting extreme pressure on the US, basically saying that it will take at least a year or two to get Hamas to disarm, and then until that happens, we should get started on the next stages of rebuilding Gaza. So convenient. Just FYI, they're also point blank refusing to cover the costs of clearing out the rubble, saying that Israel needs to foot the bill. That's billions of dollars that would come directly from Israeli taxpayers' money, and I'm not having it. These discussions are ongoing, and as of now, it seems like there might be like a 2-month buffer agreement with Trump and Israel and Qatar to get Hamas to disarm. But the question really is as such: will Israel defy the US will, or work to convince them and restart the military offensive? Or will the second stage of rebuilding Gaza start without the Hamas destruction? Regardless, it doesn't seem that Israel is planning on leaving this new yellow zone, that big buffer zone of about 50% of Gaza, and that demands military presence from our soldiers. Military presence that the Hamas terrorists are very much interested in stopping. The Gaza situation, or war as we have been calling it, is far from over. It's just moved into this kind of simmer situation. There have been rumors about the proposed next steps, who'll be controlling Gaza, etc., and there are expectations that in the next few weeks, Trump will be announcing the exact plan. We await to see what will happen. Something to keep in mind is this. Notice how both Qatar and Turkey are hoping to delay for about 2 years? Well, that coincides with both Israel's elections and Trump's. They're hoping for weaker leadership to come in, which they can then manipulate better and prolong Hamas, the most successful PR firm that they've ever had in getting the world to focus on the pro-Palestinian and not notice the Islamization. It is not a coincidence, this timeline. And all the infighting within the Republican movement, which many people are saying will bring about the loss of the midterms for the Republicans, meaning they could lose Congress, which seriously undermines the president's ability to finish his goals of his term, well, obviously, that's also being coordinated by the likes of Qatar. It's not for nothing that the leader of this disaster, Tucker Carlson, was in Doha last week promising to buy a home in Qatar and cozying up to them. We have proof that he's being funded by them extensively, and this all ties together very nicely with the 8 front, the psychological online war that we are facing. I know I'm jumping ahead and I haven't talked about the imminent war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, but bear with me, it will all make sense. Israel's failure to address the online manipulation that we are seeing is nothing short of a disgrace. It was seen for a while as less urgent, and yes, the government has been releasing all sorts of statements saying that they are fighting it, but the reality is that all the wars that we are facing are being directly supported by the psychological warfare. Think about it as like the emotional finances. A war can't succeed without money, and a war can't succeed without psychological warfare. By the way, cut the funding of a military group and the war kind of ends. Cut the psychological warfare, and it's not that different. They say that we are on the brink of World War III, but honestly, I think that's a misdiagnosis. This isn't a world war, it's a Cold War, and we are in the midst of the second one, not against Russia, but against Islamization. With Russia, we knew it was an ideological enemy, and we treated any sorts of attempts at infiltration with the utmost severity. Here, though, we missed it. Europe has been sold out, the US is halfway there, and Israel completely disregarded its responsibility to be fighting it. I won't say it's too little too late now. I think there is still much hope. But the diplomatic and psychological warfare that we are facing is not just putting Jews and our allies across the world in danger, it's impacting our military abilities with embargoes and pressure on us to not fight the way we should be doing, as well as putting our enemies into position of power. They are manipulating elections, and it's not just in the US where they're working to burn down the Republican movement, it's in Israel too. Not only are they funding infighting, but on a technical level, they're also trying to hack our voting systems. This is according to our state comptroller, who has warned that we are not prepared against a cyber attack, which Iran is working hard to put together to manipulate our elections. They don't want Netanyahu in power. And I guess that leads us to Iran. Boy, oh boy, are they in hot water, or more accurately, in no water at all, as the country is facing a water disaster that is unbelievably severe. Now, you may be wondering why, if their country is in such a bad state, they are so obsessed with still fighting Israel. Just this week, it was reported that the US seized an arms cargo ship from China that was on its way to Iran with parts to help them rebuild their firing abilities. And Trump has threatened their nuclear abilities once again, stating they can try, but it's going to take them a long time to come back. And if they do want to come back, and they want to come back without a deal, then we're going to obliterate that one too. I mean, I guess that's pretty self explanatory. This statement, by the way, was due to satellite images that were discovered by them starting cleanup operations at their new headquarters for weaponizing their nuclear program. All of this is to say that they are not planning on stopping their attacks anytime soon. It's clear to anyone in military intelligence that the war with Iran isn't over, not with its proxies that are still trying to rebuild across Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon, but also with them directly. They have ballistic missile abilities that are very much still in use, and that is because of, once again, in my opinion, Trump's mistaken doctrine, in which he got us to stop our attacks on Iran during the 12-day war way too early. We could have wiped out most of their ballistic abilities, but he stopped us. Iran 2.0, unfortunately, because of this, is going to happen. Will it be started by us or by them? And when will it be? Time will tell. But we need to understand why Iran is still so obsessed with us. And when I say Iran, obviously, I hope by now we know that I mean the Islamic Republic, which is in control of Iran. We need to go back to the religious war that we had discussed. Islam is divided into two main categories. There are the Sunnis and the Shiites. And without getting into the details, these two are in fights for the glory of Islam one day. Out of the 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, 85% are Sunni, and Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt are mainly part of the Sunni group. Iran, however, is Shia. The infighting between these groups is enormous, and a massive part of the Iranian identity is in its taking on of Israel. I have obviously oversimplified this, but in a religion where respect is the most important currency, Iran is not so quickly planning on giving up their winning card that has been part of their identity for so long. This also explains why Turkey, which is quietly growing to be a very serious enemy to Israel, is jumping in now to replace Iran and try to be involved in the reestablishment of Gaza. We spoke about this on a previous episode, and I won't get into it too much, but Turkey is vying for leadership of Islam in a very serious way. This is particularly worrisome due to the fact that they are part of NATO, which is an alliance of mainly European countries that have an agreement that if one of their countries goes to war, they will support them. A war between Israel and Turkey is a very complicated affair if we get there. But right now, it's not even one of our 8 fronts. How fun for us. So yes, whilst technically we are not currently in a direct conflict, the tensions between Israel and Iran are very much there. And where else do we have tensions? Well, with their proxies, of course. It's been a while since we've had a missile from Yemen. Isn't that nice? Which is honestly something that I didn't think about too much until I wrote this episode. Praise the Lord. May that continue. But the Houthis are also in their own way gearing up for a conflict with us, just waiting on Iran to get back into the game. This is also similar to what we're seeing in Judea and Samaria, another one of our fronts. Here we have terrorist groups popping up everywhere in hopes of rebuilding what was destroyed in Gaza. It's not for nothing that Israel has been finding ready to fire rockets throughout Tulkarem and other Palestinian areas, i.e., mini terrorist hubs. This is being supported by our enemies in hopes of destabilizing the country from within. To me, this is the scariest arena of war, one that we haven't really touched upon enough. The heart of our country is crawling with people who hate us, and this is exactly why we are constantly at war with them, whether it's called that or not. Again, this is not a war that we have started. This is a war that they continually instigate by trying to take out Israelis any chance they get. Just this week, we've had multiple instances of them throwing rockets or attempted stabbings. This is just a kind of norm, but it's not normal. And in any other country in the world, it would be treated as a full front war. But Israel has bigger fish to fry. And lots of this is being funded, obviously, by Iran and Qatar. Hamas and Jenin is not the main thing they are invested in, however. Their main proxy is Hezbollah, and they are not exactly playing the waiting game. Reports over the last few days, as well as many soldiers in Israel being told that they'll be called up to Lebanon soon, indicate that the simmering ceasefire agreement that we have with them is on the verge of collapse. Let's just clarify for a second that Lebanon and Hezbollah are not the same. Lebanon is the country, and they want Hezbollah, a terrorist group within that country, gone. They just don't really know how to do it. Let's go back and, again, oversimplify, but hopefully give the bigger picture. When the truce was agreed about a year ago, one of the main terms was that Lebanon would disarm Hezbollah, the Iran backed terror group that lives on the border with Israel but also has officials dispersed throughout Lebanon, especially in Beirut. Remember, this was something that the UN demanded years and years and years ago, and Hezbollah has blatantly disregarded. This utter disregard for disarmament is why you may have heard that Israel have done attacks throughout Beirut. No, it doesn't mean that we are really going after Lebanon's capital, but it means that they found a Hezbollah terrorist hiding among civilians and with a very targeted attack and warning for the civilians to leave, tried to take them out. Lebanon's government is weak and afraid to take on Hezbollah completely because of political and internal considerations. Israel, knowing this, stayed in 5 main areas of southern Lebanon, keeping our soldiers there and sporadically attacking Hezbollah cells during the ceasefire agreement. Again, similarly to Hamas, Israel had demands that for the agreement to take place, the terrorists would need to disarm. When they didn't, Israel decided to keep its troops there and occasionally conduct operations to make sure that they don't really manage to regroup and become the threat that they were 2 years ago. These ceasefire agreements are more like a mutual agreement on both sides to simmer down the fighting, but the fire is still very much lit. During the past year, Hezbollah has been rearming and regrouping, and Israel has honestly had enough. Many of our civilians have moved back up north and are rebuilding, and Israel wants the Hezbollah threat gone. Interestingly enough, this weekend, Lebanon asked Israel to pause an evacuation order in a village in southern Lebanon so they could take care of Hezbollah themselves. Israel agreed to this and is monitoring the situation, which just goes to show where we have reached. But this is really one of the first times this has happened, which is why Israel isn't particularly hopeful that Lebanon will actually do the work. An agreement is on the cards. The US is involved, as is the UN, what a joke, and France, even more of a joke, as they are expanding talks to try and get to the escalation to stop. But it seems unlikely that Hezbollah will disarm, and so another war is imminent. Again, remember that behind closed doors, Lebanon is hoping that Israel will remove Hezbollah, but publicly they are protesting it. America will probably support this, but they will want it to be short and swift. Time will tell. And where else is the US hyper involved? Well, Syria, of course. Front number, I don't even know at this point. During the war, we know that Israel took back parts of the Hermon, the mountain bordering Syria, to keep a buffer zone after the Assad regime fell. Why? Well, because this new ex-Al Qaeda leader, Al Julani, who up until a few years ago had a $10 million bounty on his head from the United States, and who last month, now dressed in a suit, appeared in the White House, Israel wasn't exactly convinced of the act and decided that it's probably a good idea to create a safety buffer zone in case of potential escalations. The situation in Syria is incredibly complex. It's probably one of the most complex in the Middle East. But US mediation is working to create some sort of formal security arrangement between Israel and Syria. It's quiet, but it is happening. With Trump buddying up to Al Julani in hopes of keeping him in his pockets, all he really needs is for his other ally, Israel, to fight with Julani. And so I'm not yet convinced that this will pan out the way the US is hoping, but time will tell. We do know, however, that Iran and its proxies within Syria are trying hard to derail any such agreement. Just this week, 2 US soldiers and 1 US civilian were killed in Syria by the Islamic State. Why? Well, Israel normalizing with Arab states gives us too much legitimacy, something that they have been working against for years, and they don't like the United States, our ally. Trump has vowed retaliation, and we shall see. Is this going to make the relations with America and Syria more rocky, or is it only going to strengthen the conviction that we have to figure out how to strengthen their leadership and create an allyship with Israel? Again, I think this comes back to a mistake in Trump's way of dealing with this. The super complicated landscape of Syria cannot be simplified through an agreement brokered by the US. There are crazy internal dynamics and hopes of undermining the leadership that make simplifying peace almost impossible. This is how the jihadists work, by the way. It's clear to many Arab states that peace with Israel is smart at this point, and maybe even beneficial. But to those with religious goals, it's the thing that they hate most. This is in part why we know Hamas launched an attack on Israel just as we were getting close to a deal with Saudi Arabia. Just FYI, a deal that is still definitely on the cards. Just FYI, did you know that Israel and Saudi Arabia have secretly built an amazing undersea power pipeline, even though we haven't yet normalized relations? It's called Blue Ramen and it's owned by Google and it connects us to Saudi Arabia. Why? Thereby avoiding the Houthi threat and making us the epicenter for internet and AI development for the West. The details of this are honestly fascinating. The internet of the world used to depend on going through Egypt, the pipeline that connects Asia and Europe, which we can't really depend on anymore. Now there's a pipeline from Saudi Arabia to Jordan called Raman and from Israel to Europe called Blue that connects in Israel through Eilat. Saudi Arabia agreed to this because they need the money and security that comes with this shorter line. It started in 2019, and in 2024, with the Houthis firing and destabilizing the region, the Saudis agreed to complete the project in secret. Israel is now going to be the epicenter for AI development for the world. Just think about the intelligence we now have with the data centers being here and how much countries around the world will be obliged to have good relations with us. But that's a side story, which leads us to the point of this episode. We started with wondering if Israel's at war still, and I throw this question back to you guys. Is Israel still at war? I mean, I think the answer is simple. Yes, we might not have constant missiles dropping on our heads, but our security situation is far from simple or over. We are right in the thick of it, with things able to change at any second. Unfortunately, I wonder if this is the new norm. I don't think so. I believe that with time, Israel will prove itself to be a country, honestly, not worth fighting. Even further, I think we are definitely looking at more and more countries wanting to broker peace with us as they understand that our strength and economic resources are something that they really, really want. The shekel is at its strongest point in 4 years. The Economist named Israel's the third strongest economy in the world with a top performing capital market. There is much hope for the future. It's not all leak and war. But we need patience. The wars, although simmering, are not over. Far from it. The simple truth is that this is our new reality for the time being, living with conflicts around us until we have built something so strong and resilient that it becomes clear to the world that they can't mess with us. But even with that, these are religious jihadis. They aren't planning on stopping anytime soon. This is a big part of my resentment at Israel for not really taking the Eighth Front seriously. For us to have strength in the Middle East, we must be perceived as strong. This is also my fear with the infighting. They want us with weak leadership. And it's also my issue with us being so dependent on the US. Their understanding is not what is actually needed on the ground here. They understand many things, but they don't get the jihadi mindset. Peace is not something that the Middle East wants. Strength is. And that's the strategy that needs to be taken with every single one of our enemies. No conceding on Gaza. Hamas needs to go. No giving back the land we took in Syria. Giuliani needs to know we mean business. No allowing Iran to rebuild up its arms. We must deter them at all costs. No allowing Hezbollah to launch a war with us. They must be disarmed. And Qatar and Turkey must be designated the enemy states that they are and exposed for the manipulation and hatred that they're inciting towards us. Even if it means a short-term uncomfortableness for us, if we really want the wars to end, we must think long-term. short-term pain for long-term gain. The war situation is complicated, and yes, we're in the thick of it, but it's kind of become the new norm. Let us pray that this new norm just continues to grow and strengthen our military abilities, that our soldiers stay safe, that our final hostage comes home, that we are perceived for the strength and for the godliness that we actually are as a Jewish state, as the Jewish people, as a country beyond capable, who is never ever going to cower again, that our leadership really get their act together and know what they need to do to lead the country into the next stage, a stage of unbelievable economic prosperity, military capabilities, and deterrence everywhere. Amen. I'm Ira Kay, and I will see you next time.